Hello. Hi, Scott. Can you hear us all right?
Yeah, how's it going?
Great.
Good.
How are you?
Good.
This is Hex. I'm Forest Mom. We've met in person briefly before, but I was in Arizona, I think.
That's right. Hi, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
All good.
I'm excited to have you on because I'm hungover and I'm like, great. Scott can just teach us stuff all morning. Just go at it. Talk about your new book and everything. So,
Okay. Well, ask whatever you want. You guys driving, all right, chucking.
wow. Tell us. So, what's the new book? Why don't you just dive into it?
Sure. It's hotter than the sun. Time to abolish nuclear weapons. And honestly, what happened was one of my sponsors, if you guys ever listen to the show, I got a sponsor that sells that Delta 8 weed.
Right.
My friend Jared Wall. And he'd actually helped me do some research on enough already in the past. An acquaintance of mine, libertarian guy, good guy. And one day he emailed me and said, look what I did. And it was 350 pages of interviews of guys, all about nuclear weapons that I'd done over the years. It was already done already. So then I went through it and said, well, let's cut these ones and maybe add a couple more, here and there. And, then I had put the project on the back burner because I'm working on a book about the Russia-Ukraine war with Daryl Cooper. And so I thought, well, I can't stop now. I got to just knock that out and put this aside. But then I thought, man, I got a book about nuclear war sitting right here, almost ready to go. And I'm going to put it off for how long more, and I mean, he brought it to me like a year ago or something, maybe more. I don't know. So I thought, right when we're at the most heightened risk of nuclear wars we've been since 1983, maybe I ought to go ahead and put this book out now. So I did. I kind of stopped writing the Russia-Ukraine war book for about 6 weeks here. It's taken forever, of course, but to do the final production and put the book out. And the thing is, especially because I had this guy put it together for me, and then I had a copy editor go over the thing and do all of his work to it and everything. It was really, really far along in the process before I finally sat down and read through the whole thing. And then I liked it. And I admit, I'm skeptical because it is a book of interview transcripts. And I know how that sounds. Like, hey, you want to read a book full of interview transcripts? Probably not, really, except that this is from my show. So it's really good. It's actually, I admit, it does have too much of me talking in it for interviews of other people. But on the other hand, it's 43 something interviews on all aspects of nuclear weapons, all the nuclear weapon states, the nuclear weapons industrial complex and all the money involved, the so-called rogue states of Iraq, Iran, Syria, North Korea, and Israel, and their nuclear weapons programs, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then all the anti-nuclear activists, and I've just got some gold over the years. I guess that was what happened. Was Jared was listening to a few of these and was like, man, I'm gonna put together a book of this stuff. It's really good stuff. So I'm really happy with it. It's called did I say Hotter Than the Sun, Time to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, and it's all interviews. And so far there's just one review on Amazon, but it's Pat McGeehan, the American hero, the guy that invented the Defend the Guard legislation there in West Virginia. And he liked it, so
That's good. At least the first review is a good review, at least, right?
There you go. Yeah, exactly. Wouldn't that be funny if the first one was 1 star? Don't be stupid. You gotta have nukes. Everybody knows that, dummy. Which is what everybody people rush to say that on Twitter. And look, I mean, I got to admit that I know that the subtitle is "Time to Abolish Nuclear Weapons." Well, here's a 450-page book all about all aspects of nuclear weapons, right? But I had to title it something, and that is ultimately my point. And we do talk about how that could be done in there with the various activists and people, wonks involved in that kind of thing, how we could outlaw nukes. But that is people's initial reaction is, nuh-uh, because nukes keep the peace. Well, maybe between the major powers they do so far, but it doesn't stop the major powers from waging absolutely genocidal wars against minor powers, as we've seen this whole time. Fingers pointed at the United States of America, for example. And also, mutually assured destruction only works until it stops working. And the point where both sides get to brinksmanship and threats and nobody feels like they can back down, or people make a, essentially a miscalculation about the other side's intentions or whatever it is, then the whole world goes up in smoke, or certainly the northern half of the world goes up in smoke. And so it's a gamble that so far has paid off, but so far it's just a blink of an eye, 70 years. But think about it like this. Is this how we're going to maintain the peace on Earth for another 70 years, or for, say, like another 700 years? That this is just how it's going to be. From now on, all the major powers are going to be holding H-bombs at each other's cities' heads. And then that's how we're going to never fight. And that just makes perfect sense for the indefinite future, for our great grandchildren's generation. That's how they're going to do it too. Really? There's got to be a better way. So that's what I'm saying. At least we should be arguing about this.
Do you
Start
have
treating it like, it's completely ridiculous, hippie crap or something like that, which it's not. I mean, you got admirals and generals and former secretaries of state and secretaries of defense who say we got to get rid of these things. They're not hippies. They know enough about these machines that they're saying, man, we can't just leave these things lying around, dude. It's like leaving an AK in a room full of toddlers. You know what? We should lock this thing up somewhere they can't put their hands on it.
Right. And that reminded me, like, during the Cold War, there were several instances where their world almost ended because of simple things like technology glitches with the computer systems or whatever. And the only reason that didn't happen is because someone kind of knew better and said, no, don't launch. This is an error.
Right.
And it's like, what's to stop some kind of technological error from happening? And then everyone just jumping the gun and saying, okay, let's fire these things off now over an error. What's to say that can't happen?
Listen, I mean, it sounds kind of silly or like a TV show kind of narrative or some kind of thing like that, but you're absolutely right. And there are at least 20 extremely close calls. There's a guy named Eric Schlosser, who I never did read his book and interview him, but I read about his book, and he's got 20 examples of where we almost went to nuclear war over accidents and miscalculations and, as you just said, failing microchips and this and that. In fact, I was just retweeting. A follower of mine had a thing, or a guy I follow on Twitter had a thing about, he tweeted out an article about Curtis LeMay from the New Yorker magazine from 1995. And it was about how Curtis LeMay wanted to do a preemptive nuclear war against the Soviet Union, or over the slightest pretext, how he and his guys had absolutely urged, virtually threatened a coup in order to try to force Jack Kennedy to invade Cuba in 1962 in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And what's funny is, so I already knew about one of these things in there, was that there was a nuclear submarine, a Soviet submarine, where the Americans were dropping depth charges on them. And they were supposed to know that these are just the warning kinds of depth charges. You can tell at the depth at which we're detonating them. If they were the "we're really trying to kill you" kind of depth charges, they would be detonating lower. So don't worry, we can drop as many of these as we want, and the Soviets will know we're not really trying to kill them. We're just messing with them and trying to force them to surface, this kind of thing. Well, down below, the Soviets didn't take it that way at all. They thought that we were trying to kill them. And the two ranking officers on the sub said, let's launch our atom bomb torpedoes at these American destroyers that are dropping these depth charges. If we're going down, we're taking them down with us. And if they had done that, that would have been general nuclear war over the entire planet. Right there. Yep. The Reds set off the first atom bomb on our Navy in the Caribbean. We nuked Moscow and Beijing and every city in between over that. And what happened was a Communist Party official, a civilian party official, commissar on the boat, on the Soviet sub, said, no, we're not doing that. I disagree and I overrule, and so we're not. But that would have been it right there.
Yep.
If that commissar had been on a different sub instead of that one, because the other subs didn't all each have their own commissar from the party. You know what I mean? It was just this one happened to have one attached there, I believe is the way it was. Well, so I already knew that story. But then I'm reading this New Yorker article, and they're saying in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Pacific Command launched a 3-stage missile across the Pacific Ocean in what looked like it could be a first strike on Beijing, or, you know, not starting off the nuclear war by hitting, I guess, Soviet assets in their Far East in Vladivostok or something like that, which, you know, fortunately wasn't misinterpreted, but there it goes. And then they had a spy plane that they flew over the Soviet Union that got shot at, if not shot down. It wasn't the U-2 incident. That was under Eisenhower before. But there was another spy plane. And so, in other words, there were all these other things that there were 3 or 4 other things that they talked about in there. I really need to go reread that and memorize that. You know, like 3 or 4 other things that took place right in the heat of the Cuban Missile Crisis that were like out of the president's control, you know, and even out of Khrushchev's control. One thing was the Cubans shot at, but not down, but did hit a U-2 spy plane flying over Cuba. And they were under orders not to do that, but they did it anyway, right? Because it's the commander, you know, implementer problem, whatever you call it. I always forget it. Can't really control the people who work for you. You can only kind of make suggestions. At the end of the day, they're going to call their own orders.
Right.
And then there's all these accidents too. The more famous one, I think, is from 93 when the Norwegians launched a rocket. This is after the Cold War's over. We're all friends again. And the Norwegians told the Russians, hey, we're launching a satellite into space here, so don't panic. And the Russians said, okay, roger that. And then it got lost in the chain of command. So when the missile went off, the people who were supposed to be alarmed about such things were alarmed about such things and had not been warned that this is going to happen today. So they flipped out and all went to press their buttons. But then it was one lieutenant colonel or whatever it was. I forgot if that was the one with Stanislav or whatever, who said, no, everybody hold your horses. We're not doing that. Let's wait and see, because this could be a misunderstanding. If it was really a first strike, would it just be one missile? I don't know. And then there you go. Oh, it broke orbit and it didn't come back down again. It's not a ballistic missile after all. But all the machines said go. And I believe he's the one that said if he had done his job, we'd all died. Because his job was to pass that warning on to his superiors. And he had no flexibility or discretion in that. He was supposed to pass that intelligence on to his superiors. And he just said, nah, you know what? We're going to not do that. And he swore that if he had, they would have launched. They would not have waited. They would have said, oh my God, this is what we do in this situation. And I guess just because he knew those guys, oh yeah, Yuri and Sergei, yeah, they would have screwed that up. You know what I mean? That was essentially the way he put it, was, you know, his commanders would have absolutely launched. And that's, you know, 2 full years after the Soviet Union didn't even exist anymore.
Right.
When we should have negotiated away every last one of these things already. And here we are at the risk of a nuclear war over total accidents. And then there was also like the time where the U.S. Air Force dropped a H-bomb over North Carolina, and 8 out of 9 fail-safes failed.
Oh, I know about that one. Yeah.
Right. So if the 9th one had failed, then they would have nuked North Carolina. And then the question is, well, they're just going to suck it up and say, well, Mr. President, it was us. And is the president going to say, sorry, we nuked our own state because we're stupid? Or are they just going to say, they're just going to pretend that's a Russian first strike and just go from there?
Right.
You know, this kind of thing. And anyway, like I say, there's like 20 of them. So, and, you know, I'm sorry, because I'm not the world's greatest expert on this. I really need to go through and maybe write my own essay about this, where I got it all categorized in my head, right, where you have all the different mistakes and the misunderstandings and the miscalculations about the other side's intentions. If we do this, they'll do that. If we do this, they'll know that what we mean by that is this. Like I was saying with the depth charges there. You know, this is a language of depth charges, but you know what? Your depth charge language has been misinterpreted, and you almost got us all killed just with that one right there. And I think there's a lot of those. Now I'll give you, to bring us up to date here, I'll give you an example. John Mearsheimer from the University of Chicago has been preaching caution on Ukraine for many years now, and, you know, denounced the coup of 2014 in the pages of Foreign Affairs because he can. So pretty incredible. Well, he was in a debate with a former Obama official, this lady named Evelyn Farkas, on the NewsHour. And essentially they all agreed on the syllogism as presented by the NewsHour host. They go, look, Russia will not use nuclear weapons unless they feel like the existence of their state is threatened, in which case their official doctrine is that, yes, they will. Then they agreed that, yes, it's true that if Russia loses the war in Ukraine, that he might consider that to amount to an existential threat to the Russian state. And then premise 3, we're doing everything we can to pour all these weapons into Ukraine to make sure that Russia loses the war in Ukraine. And then the NewsHour lady, this is the PBS NewsHour, okay, says, yeah, geez, I don't know, it sounds kind of risky. What do you think, John Mearsheimer there? And Mearsheimer's going, this is insane. He goes, I'm sorry, this is just completely crazy. I can't believe that we're doing this. He goes, this would be like if we were in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, only Jack Kennedy is refusing to talk to Khrushchev. Can you imagine that? That's what we are right now. We are in a Cuban Missile Crisis level, DEFCON 2 type alert or worse on Russia's border, and we haven't talked to them in months while people are dying. This is an absolute crime. This is, and they go, okay, yeah, got it. Well, what about you, Evelyn Farkas? And Evelyn Farkas goes, yes, it's true that they would never use nukes unless they thought their state was threatened. And yes, if they lose this war, then they might feel their state is threatened. And yes, we're doing everything we can to make sure they lose this war. But I'm sure if they use nuclear weapons, they will signal to us before they do their intention to do so, And I'm going, because I'm screaming at my TV, but they can't hear me, that Vladimir Putin himself, when he announced this war in February, threatened the use of nuclear weapons against foreign states who intervene in this war. He was talking about you and me. That was in the original declaration of war. Then, since then, his foreign minister and his defense minister and deputy defense minister and the former president, the temporary president, now so-called, I guess, director of the National Security Council there, Viktor Medvedev, has also said, all of them have threatened that this could go nuclear. The way we're going now, the way this thing is escalating, this could turn into a world-ending event. Nobody misunderstands what that means. There's your signal, Evelyn Farkas. They're signaling to you that you guys keep pushing it. We might start splitting atoms here. And then her answer is, well, I don't know. I didn't hear that. Come on, let's push it another notch further and another notch further. And look, this guy, Mearsheimer, I mean, relatively speaking, this guy's a hero, right? But this is not a Ron Paul guy. He's a Henry Kissinger guy, right? He is not, he is certainly not a neoconservative or a liberal internationalist. He's a real politic guy, right? A great power theorist, realist. So if it came down to, do we need to wage war in Europe again? He could be convinced, right? If he thought that Germany was going to be the dominant power from Spain to Russia, he might propose World War III against Germany. He's the kind of guy who thinks we should not let the Germans or anybody else dominate the entire European landmass, except for us maybe. But even us, probably not. But definitely we shouldn't let anybody else do that either, right? So in other words, I'm just saying, I'm not trying to throw the guy under the bus, but I'm just saying he's a realist. He's not a Ron Paulian non-interventionist, you could say idealist, right? From our same point of view. He's not. He's a realist. And but he is not a hawk on this. He's not one of them who's already part of the consensus. So he doesn't have to defend the consensus. He can sit outside of it and criticize it. And he sounds like me. And you know me, I'm a little bit hyperbolic. I'm the guy from antiwar.com. I get to rail against this stuff. That's my job. But he's the guy from the University of Chicago. And he rails against this. Like, are you people absolutely out of your minds? What are we doing? Again, comparing it to the Cuban Missile Crisis, directly the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we got as close to nuclear war as possible without it happening. And say, that's where we are right now. Only worse because dumber. Because instead of Jack Kennedy and his brother, we've got Joe Biden and Jake Sullivan. And so now what are we going to do? And then the answer is we haven't, our foreign minister hasn't spoken to their foreign minister since February the 15th. And, look, it's a funny thing, right? This topic, because on one hand, if you say, listen, there's a threat of nuclear war, you almost discredit yourself just for mentioning that, because that's so hyperbolic and alarmist and crazy. Like, really, we're going to start destroying each other's cities here in a general nuclear war? I mean, probably not, right? I don't know. We're not really threatening regime change in Moscow, just only the hard way, by way of economic war against them and stretch them thin and hope, they'll fall someday kind of thing. 1990s policy against Hussein, or late 90s, I should say, policy against Hussein, not 03 policy. So maybe nobody has any reason to worry about this, and I sound like an idiot even for bringing it up. But then again, yeah, they do have 6,000 nukes, and so do we. And at the end of the day, to a military man, especially, let's pretend to believe that American military men aren't like this at all. But possibly I could convince you that in the mind of a Russian general, an atom bomb is just a bigger bomb. And if the last kind of bomb on the shelf didn't work, break out the bigger bomb. At some point, this so-called taboo against fission is broken, and they just simply become useful. And so they use them. And that absolutely can happen. And now, from our point of view, some of the good news here is that it doesn't look like they need them. And I'm not saying, good for the Russians in their war, but I'm just saying they do not now have their back against the wall, where it's either use atom bombs or leave in humiliating defeat. So that's good. That we're actually, at this point, they're not in a binary choice of whether to use them or not. But again, Evelyn Farkas confirms this is the policy. Hell, Lloyd Austin and Antony Blinken confirmed this is what we're trying to do, is drive them all the way out, and hopefully that their government will fall as the consequence of losing this war. I mean, they've said that openly. The principals and the highest levels of the cabinet have said that. So, and then you do hear from time to time, again, just like I was saying there on the PBS NewsHour, you have even hawks like Farkas saying, well, this is a real concern, but I'm just not concerned about it, or whatever, right? But like, they're not completely dismissing it. And they shouldn't be, and none of us should be. And I'll stop rambling after this one last point here, which is picture that
keep
map
rambling. Keep rambling. I like it.
Picture a map of Europe in your head. You have this arc of the big states, right? You got Spain and France and Poland and Ukraine. And then you got the smaller ones kind of beneath there, the Italy and the Balkans and all of that stuff, right? But you have like this arc of these giant states here. So we used to draw the line halfway across Germany. And the idea was, if the Reds tried to come across the Elbe River into West Germany, threatening not just West Germany, but France and ultimately Britain and Spain and other allies in Western Europe, and we'll go to nuclear war against you, man. You better not. You better not cross that river. And we are prepared to use atom bombs. Now, I'm not saying I'm for that, but I'm saying that was the bluff, and that's where the line was. But now we move that line 1,200 miles east, to the other side, not just of Poland, but of Ukraine. And not just as Poland, but also then the Baltic states to the east of Poland there were integrated by W. Bush. So that's Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Now, luckily, Russia doesn't have a border dispute with those countries right now, although there's sort of a little pseudo one brewing in Kaliningrad there, which I'll get back to in a second, I guess, if you want. But now we've got this line. We've moved the line all the way to Russia's very western border. And with their most important client state, or, historically, maybe their second most important client state after Belarus would be Ukraine, and maybe first most important. And you also have to understand about Moscow that there's no river or mountain or valley or anything that protects Moscow from invasion from the west. It's just open plains. They're like 300 miles from their western border there. So, and they've been invaded over and over and over again in a way that we just have no experience with that. There's no one who has the slightest experience with the War of 1812 other than people who sit around reading history books all day. But it's not part of any sort of living memory in the United States of America at all. There's remnants of the Civil War still, but the last time we were invaded by a foreign power from across the sea, and it's true, Japan did a couple strikes in Alaska, things like that in World War II, but that doesn't really count. Again, no one experienced that. It doesn't have, you know what I mean? The Russians have been invaded and conquered and destroyed and brought to the near, to the absolute brink of ruination over and over again by, the Mongol hordes and by Napoleon and by the German Nazis, and then by, even the Americans and the British invaded them right after the Russian Revolution, after World War I, although that didn't come to much. But so, they have a very paranoid outlook about their security situation, and our side just keeps absolutely pushing their luck. And, our establishment might like to deny, you guys see how they call it, the unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, the unprovoked invasion. Remember when they killed Randy Weaver's wife and son? They were like, white separatist Randy Weaver, white separatist Randy Weaver. So they can't just say like widower Randy Weaver or grieving father of slain 14-year-old boy Randy Weaver. No, it has to be white separatist Randy Weaver so that you cannot consider this guy's side of the story at all. This is the same kind of thing here. Unprovoked attack. Unprovoked attack. Like, this is the slogan. You're not allowed to call it any other thing than that. Well, but doesn't that reveal just on the face of it right away? I think Chomsky made this point that, yeah, they call it that because it was a provoked attack. They provoked it and they know it. And they're worried that you and I might have a conversation about how provoked it was or something. So they're trying to somehow like make it verboten by building into the name of the war that somehow it came from out of the blue. And somehow the only explanation could be Russian malevolence or, mental illness. That was what Condoleezza Rice said. Oh, Putin's gone crazy. This isn't the Putin I know. This is some other different weird kind of Putin who would do such a thing as this. Now, as Condoleezza Rice put these anti-missile missiles in Poland. They're fired from dual-use missile launchers, the Mark 41 missile launcher, that you can fit a Tomahawk missile with an H-bomb on the tip in there if you want. And the Russians consider that as encroaching threat of a nuclear first strike. And, there's a conversation between Putin and Oliver Stone, but there's a better one between him and Jack Matlock, who was the second to last ambassador to the Soviet Union. And they met at some kind of club. I think Putin was in America, and they met at some club dinner type debate discussion sort of thing. And Jack Matlock says, come on, Vladimir Putin, you know that missile defense is just a ripoff. It's a boondoggle. So the American government can steal money from the American people and give it to their friends in these arms dealer corporations. Man, we're not trying to build up a first strike threat against you, dude. We're just trying to rip off the people, And Putin is like kind of astounded. And goes, man, well, okay, look, okay, I understand the economics of the military industrial complex in America and everything, but like, couldn't you just subsidize something else? Like subsidize some other industry or research or medicine or something? Why do you have to subsidize anti-missile missiles around my country? Like you're trying to nullify mutually assured destruction. Don't you understand? I have to respond to that. I'm in charge of security here, pal. I can't just sit here and write it off as just a welfare program for your corporations. It's more than that to me. And now it was just a couple years after that Putin then deployed, announced, I guess began to deploy their new generation of nuclear weapons. That they had begun their research project on expanding their nuclear weapons program after George W. Bush tore up the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002. They said, you really shouldn't do that. And then once they did that, Putin, same guy, ordered a massive new nuclear weapons program. So now they have hypersonic missiles. They claim to have a nuclear-powered cruise missile that can go around the Earth 10 times, essentially unlimited range to go around any defenses and sneak up on targets. They claim to have a new heavy MIRV rocket that's multiple independently re-entry vehicle rocket. that has enough warheads on it that just one can kill every city in Texas or France if you take your pick.
You
there.
level the East Coast if you wanted to, something like that.
And level the entire East Coast, exactly. And that's just one rocket, and it's designed to go around the South Pole, where we don't even pretend to have defenses to protect missiles coming in from the south. And then a new nuclear torpedo, which are launching a new nuclear sub that is supposed to be equipped with this new nuclear torpedo, which is essentially impossible to detect, and that could destroy any naval port or commercial port in the world or in the United States of America. Imagine a H-bomb going off dead center in San Francisco Bay and just, splashing the entire Bay Area with radioactive poison water, and scalding hot too, and just blowing that whole area away that way. Or Long Beach or San Diego or whatever you got there, Honolulu. And so, and then what did I leave out? Let's see, the torpedo, the cruise missile, the hypersonics, the heavy missile. I guess that was it. And then Putin said in that speech, he goes, I tried to tell y'all, please listen. We don't want to have a nuclear brinksmanship type contest with you guys again. Why would we do that? We've already been through this. Let's not do this. But you wouldn't listen. Well, I bet you can hear me now. And then the reaction was, yeah, they could. And they tried to play it down. The New York Times like, oh, well, he claims to have these weapons. I don't know, man. Maybe he's bluffing on one or two, like that nuclear cruise missile still in development or something. But you're telling me like this is all just smoke and mirrors and a PR stunt? I don't think so. And, the real experts took him seriously, even as the New York Times tried to spin it away. But this is the absolutely foreseeable consequence of America's brinksmanship against them. Same thing with the INF Treaty. INF Treaty was Ronald Reagan's greatest achievement, 1987, to get all the short and medium range missiles out of Europe. And Donald Trump tore it up. And the Americans said, well, the Russians are cheating. They've made these missiles that are the inappropriate range. Well, that may be true, but then that's a reason to hold some talks and see if we can make some progress on that. Get them to fix it. Get them maybe to admit it if you can really confront them with the fact, and maybe get them back into compliance. And as Joe Cirincione said, somebody breaks the law by murdering someone, you don't repeal the murder statute. You try to figure out a way to implement it as best you can and use it to deter other murders if you can. But you don't just give up. And the thing is, the Americans are probably right that the Russian missile violated the correct mileage and everything. But the Russians had a point that the Americans put those dual-use missile launchers into Poland and Romania first, those Mark 41 missile launchers. And so they don't know that those only have defensive missiles on them, which are their own provocation. But they can fit Tomahawk missiles. And so the Russians had an argument that the Americans were the ones violating at least the spirit of the INF Treaty before they violated it. And then I have it on good authority, it's in the book, that the only reason that the Russians or Americans wanted out of this treaty, or at least wanted to break it, was to threaten China. The Russians, even though they have a budding, friendship and relationship with China, still they have this wide open, huge border to Siberia with them. And so they're putting medium range missiles there. They don't need three stage missiles. They share a border. Right. So they're putting these medium range missiles in there to keep the Chinese out. And then guess what? The Americans also, that's why they wanted to break the treaty, is they want to put medium range missiles in the Philippines or on ships at sea, or, if they're lucky somehow in South Korea or Japan or on Guam, so they can threaten China, from the Pacific. So what's funny is if our imperialists had their act together, you might think they'd be making an alliance with Russia against China, and an alliance with China against Russia, or be trying to. Instead, they hate them both. They're pushing them together and, recreating, healing up that old Sino-Soviet split, as it was called then, and pushing Russia and China together again, and giving them the power essentially to thwart American will in the world, which is happening more and more all the time. So the whole policy, if we were imperialists, we would fire the current group because they suck at what they're doing, and they really are risking all of mankind. And by the way, just for people who don't know, because there are a lot of people who are young, they don't really know very much about this. The atom bomb that they dropped on Hiroshima was about 10 kilotons and killed 100,000 people. And when they dropped on Nagasaki, was about 15 kilotons and killed about 75,000 people. But the modern day nuclear weapons, the Nagasaki bomb is the blasting cap for a hydrogen bomb, a fusion bomb. And then those go off in the high tens of kilotons and even into the megaton ranges, sometimes even to the tens of megatons. But a 1 megaton bomb would destroy your entire city. I mean, if you picture, I don't know if you guys have ever been to Austin, Texas, but it would essentially destroy all the metropolitan Austin, Texas, from Breaker Lane in the north to, you know, probably Ben White in the south, or maybe to Stastny or further than that. It'd kill everybody. 500,000 people, you know, 1 million people probably around in the surrounding area in one shot. And the same thing for your town. No surviving an H bomb hit. That's everything.
Yep.
And so, you know, as they say, the cliche is like the people who die in a nuclear war are the lucky ones, because the people who got to survive the apocalypse and try to figure out how to go from there, when, you know, 9/10 of all the wealth in our country has been completely destroyed, when every single, you know, system of distribution of food resources is broken, when, you know, you have warlords attempting to maintain, you know, establish territory here and there. Post-apocalyptic wasteland is something out of a video game. You know, it's something that, you know, my grandpa always said, I hope the first one lands on my head the day ever comes, because who wants to live through that? So,
Right.
you know, it does sound, again, I know I sound alarmist even bringing it up as a topic, but these things are real. And like I say, Mearsheimer and Farkas, they can debate this on the news hour. Then I think we all need to talk about the fact that there is a threat of nuclear war here. And as I say, the Russians have explicitly warned. Farkas has just got her fingers in her ears singing Mary Had a Little Lamb or something she can't hear. The Russians warning over and over again that, man, you guys really don't want this war to escalate out of control, do you?
And it's funny you brought up the bombs that were dropped on Japan. If I remember right, only a small, super small percentage of the fissile material actually detonated, and it killed and still killed as many people as it did. So just imagine what the technology we have now.
Yeah. So if you look at the picture, I guess over my shoulder here, you can see the front of the book. People just, you type this in, look it up, the Red Wing Apache test. It'll show right up in your Google images there. And even they have video of it on YouTube. It's from the Red Wing series, and they're all named after Indian tribes, I guess. And this was the Apache. It's just a 1 megaton bomb. And, you know, I picked you can tell, I think maybe the shape of the thing is when it's still a dome shape. You know, the kind of cliche of a nuke is that mushroom cloud with the ring around it and everything.
Yep.
But in all those pictures, and the thing is huge, maybe, but it's huge tall, right? And it's already like ash color, smoke color. And then to me, that always kind of raises a question that, like, wow, so nukes are really devastating to any birds above a city that gets nuked or something, right? They're like, who cares about how tall the explosion is when it's empty space up there? The question is, what does it do to the land on the ground beneath?
Yeah,
you know,
the surrounding land, right?
Yeah. So I wanted to show, you know, the nuke in, you know, and I found this great picture where it's still red hot fire and it's still, you know, in the shape of a dome, and that initial explosion before it gets so big that it turns into that mushroom cloud, kind of more cliche sort of a color. And then I'm so stupid that it didn't even occur to me until someone pointed out that, like, oh, it looks like a setting sun or a rising sun. And I'm like, oh yeah. No, I didn't even think of that. It just, I called it hotter than the sun because I always thought like that's what it should be called, because, you know, nukes are hotter than the sun. And when you first find that out, is that really true? They're hotter than the sun? Hell yeah, they are. Hotter than the center of the sun. Maybe 10 times hotter than the center of the sun, or 100 times hotter than the center of the sun. Then you go, holy shit, man, that's really crazy. Well, someone pointed out to me that, oh yeah, the nuke on the cover looks like a sun itself. And then, so that's actually, I think, fun that hopefully it tricks you. At first it looks like a sun, and it says hotter than the sun, and you go hotter than the sun, then you have a picture of the sun like you're comparing something to the sun, and there's this time to abolish nuclear weapons, and you go, Oh, that's not a sun. That's a nuclear bomb going off. Holy crap. Because it's a pretty impressive nuke going off. And again, that's just 1 megaton compared to, we do have bombs that, you know, are in the 10, 20 megaton range.
The Russians built the Tsar bomb, which is like 50.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, I mean, they never put those in their arsenal, but they did test one that was 50 megatons. And people can look at that footage. And by the way, you know, there was one picture that sort of almost made the cut that I was considering for the title. That was one that was more mushroom cloud shaped and was just huge, with the ring around it and everything, like in a Far Side cartoon or whatever, right? And I'm looking at thing and I'm like, wow, that's really an impressive mushroom cloud, you know. And then my eyes go down to the bottom, and then, you know, you can see the land at the bottom, and now you get a sense of the scale. And then you realize how absolutely humongous that thing was. You're talking about a nuke that could kill all of Houston, Texas in just one shot. You know, the kind of thing that is just, it's incredible to think that they'd have gone so far. How many megatons is too many, guys? Are we going to go for 10? Are we going to go for 20? And then, oh, here's a fun anecdote for you. And we talk about it in there, and there's, you know, one of the guys I interview names the book that this is all in and everything. Dick Cheney was the Secretary of Defense under H.W. Bush, 1989 through 93. And, you know, during Iraq War I and everything. And there's a story about, very well-sourced story, about how when he first became the Secretary of Defense, he went and sat in, and now again, so he's overseeing the end of the Cold War. By the time he comes into power in 89, the wall has already come down. His boss, H.W. Bush, is negotiating away American nukes by the tens of thousands as the Soviet Union is completely falling apart, you know. But certainly our real contest is already over. I mean, Reagan already broke the ice with Gorbachev years ago, and now the walls come down. They're letting people flee Eastern Europe. And so the tensions between America and the Soviet Union at the time that this is happening have been ratcheted way, way down. So Dick Cheney sits down and they go, okay, here's a big map on the wall, you know, an electronic map. And here's what it'll look like if we have a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. And every red dot is a nuke going off, right? And he sits there, and so he watches up on the board as they just absolutely nuke every city in Russia, and including they nuke Moscow over and over and over, dozens, scores of times, maybe like more than 100 times they nuke Moscow. And eventually Dick Cheney, the most famous war criminal in our society, who H.W. Bush, before he died, called Old Iron Ass, who he blamed for lying his son into war in Iraq, the literal most heartless man in America, was squirming in his chair and saying to, I guess, mostly the Air Force planners or the nuclear war planners, what in the fuck am I looking at here? What is this? Why do we nuke Moscow 100 times? Turn this off. I want this thing rewritten. Now, this is just insane to imagine. Now, imagine, you know, the very first nuke or two is going to turn Moscow. Again, we're talking about thermo nukes here, H bombs here. They're going to turn Moscow's already going to be a crater, right? Yep. Not just the city's gone flat like Hiroshima. It's going to be a crater where Moscow was. And now we're going to nuke that crater, you know, like it's been hit by a meteorite or something. We're going to hit that crater over and over and over and over again. There hadn't been a living thing there in 10 H bombs ago. And we're going to nuke it over and over and over and over again. And to the point where even Dick Cheney is saying this is completely crazy. And it's because what happens is every time they develop a new nuke, they just add it to the list of weapons that'll be deployed. But they don't cross the old stuff off the list. It all stays too. And then every service wants at least 2 or 3 cracks at everything because, geez, what if one of them's a dud? We don't want that. But then the Air Force and the Navy get in a contest. Well, that's not fair that the Air Force gets to launch cruise missiles and air-dropped bombs and 3-stage intercontinental ballistic missiles at Moscow. but we don't get to hit Moscow at all. We only get to hit their ports. That's not fair. And then, okay, Navy, you guys get to hit Moscow too. And they go, okay, well, of course, each sub gets their own crack at it, or else that's not fair, right? And so now, and then guess what? They invented a new kind of bomb. Now we're going to add that to the list. And then, so now here, after decades of this, no rational men have ever gone through and cleaned up the damn plan, right? The plan is not written out of military necessity. Like if you just had a brand new plan and the planner didn't know how many nukes are for sale right now, but was just saying like, here's exactly what we need to fight Russia and to take out all of their major airstrips and ports and whatever it was, it would be this fantastically small number in comparison. But you know, I asked Andrew Coburn, I'm like, man, what is the explanation for just how this is? He's like, you always got to think about it, as crazy as it sounds, even when it's H-bombs. The answer always is the money. The money, dude. They're making new H-bombs, so they're adding them to the inventory. And then when you add them to the inventory, you got to get rid of those things. It's just like when they're bombing Laos for years and years and years, they're bombing Laos. It's in American Holocaust. You can find the clip in American Holocaust. The congressman asked the Air Force general, well, after the original mission was over, how come you just kept bombing them? And he goes, well, they just kept sending me bombs. I couldn't let them pile up on the tarmac, you know? So for years and years and years and years and years, they're just bombing civilians in Laos, killed 1 million of them or more. Because the bombs are going to pile up on the tarmac, man. You know, calling Ludwig von Mises and the economics of bureaucracy, you know, this is how it works. Reason has nothing to do with it. And it's no different talking about cluster bombs than talking about H-bombs.
So is America still making a lot of nuclear bombs then, like, right?
All the time. And this is one of the great ironies in the book is in order to get the New START treaty passed, which is now the only treaty that limits overall possession of intercontinental ballistic missiles and overall possession of nuclear bombs. In order to get that treaty passed, Obama had to make a deal with the nuclear weapons states, what they call the Nuclear Weapons Caucus, that we promise to give you a new program, $1 trillion to completely revamp and rebuild America's nuclear arsenal and America's nuclear industry. New factories, you know, new, you know, blank checks for the guys at Sandia and Lawrence Livermore and all the different laboratories, you know, the government laboratories that make the things. And then, you know, I guess all the bases that house them and all the rest of the stuff. And so, I mean, imagine it's so funny, man. The economics of it is like Hans Hoppe and the God that failed, democracy, the God that failed, and all that. Where you think about the economics of a senator who is part of the Nuclear Weapons Caucus, who makes it their priority to keep hydrogen bombs in their states for the money and to keep the business of making them going for the money. And when you have, for example, you know, even people who, you know, think we need a nuclear deterrent, there's still a major movement to get rid of all the Minutemen missiles, the, you know, ground-based silo missiles in Nebraska, the Dakotas, Wyoming, Montana, because essentially they don't serve any strategic purpose. And they end up really only painting a target on the American people. We have, with our Air Force and with our Navy, we have all the nuclear deterrent that we need. So we don't need a triad. We just need a dyad of nuclear deterrent. It would be just fine. Argue many experts, you know, people far more hawkish than me agree about that. But then, and I should say, and this is in the book, the only reason we have all these nukes in those silos at this point is what they call the nuclear sponge. It's so that if we get into a war with Russia, they will be forced to empty their arsenals trying to take out all of our Minutemen in the middle of the country, thus sparing our betters on the coasts, which is all BS anyway. Like, we're going to have a general nuclear war with Russia, but they're going to spare New York and DC. No, they're not.
Hit those first.
Right? Yeah, they're going to hit them first anyway, or two anyway. But We're going to force them to also nuke the people. We're going to make them. Our doctrine is to coerce their behavior and modify their behavior into nuking Nebraska, Colorado, the Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, in order to spare the populations on the East Coast, the people who got us into this mess, the damn Democrats and Republicans with the actual power, who could ever even cause such a war. And then, so then when you tell these people, listen, you're the nuclear sponge, you're the sacrificial lamb, we need to negotiate a policy to get rid of these things. They go, no, we want to keep these H-bombs. We want to keep these bases, on basic, just, seen and unseen sort of principles. That's federal revenue into our states. Whatever would happen to the diner across the street from the nuclear armaments base if we closed down the Minutemen silos, that diner would go out of business. And, with this kind of just absolutely, elementary economic thinking, we don't ever want to halt militarism because of what it'll cost us without actually looking at what militarism costs us in the first place and where that wealth could be going instead. And you can see time after time, and they close military bases, they're turned into productive use facilities, where, they turn into business parks or whatever it is, where people, factories or whatever, where people are actually making things and creating new wealth for people instead of just destroying wealth by exploding it all the time. But, in the very near term sense, if you demilitarize the whole country, yes, that would be $1 trillion a year that's not going directly into hands. And that would feel like a Great Depression to them, even though that'd be $1 trillion not being stolen from the rest of us and wasted. That could instead be invested into productive uses. So, and so that's what you have. You have these absolutely perverse economic and bureaucratic incentives that perpetuate the threat of nuclear, speciescide, right? Omnicide, for these most narrow kind of parochial interests. That if a communist made that up about this is how capitalist America works, you'd be like, shut up, commie. And then you'd be like, yeah, okay, you're right. That's true. That is how it works. It's just for the money.
So is that caucus actually called the Nuclear Weapons Caucus or whatever it is?
Yes, I'm afraid so. It is.
Oh my God. If
That's
that doesn't
exactly
raise
right.
any red flags for the vast majority of people, then
Right. And we're just protecting our security. Come on. No, we're not. And you see this all the time. You just saw this last week. The Congress passed the NDAA, and it has $35 billion in it, $37 billion in it, more than what the president and the Pentagon asked for. Well, where's that money going? The Air Force is like, no, we don't want nuclear weapons for our surface ships. And Congress is like, no, we insist. What?
I did see that.
It's a racket.
I have heard that.
Yeah.
They just like pass all these defense budgets and whatever. And then these guys from whatever branch of the military, they come in and say, hey, we don't actually need, 14,000 more bombs or.
Hey, just check the headlines on antiwar.com. This happened literally a week ago.
Yeah, because it raised it up to like 800 total or something, right?
Yeah, more.
I think, yeah.
Yep. And if you count the VA and if you count the Energy Department, which maintains the nuclear weapons, you're talking more than $1 trillion a year on militarism.
So your tax dollars, people.
Yep. And people think of it like, again, if you took this away, in fact, regular people say, well, war is good for the economy. But how could that be? We've been at war for 20 years straight and we're all flat broke. And doesn't it just make sense that if you take a bunch of dollars and you put them together in the form of a fighter bomber, and then you sling some bombs, some more money in the form of bombs under its wings, and you fly it across the world on a, $500,000 tank of gas to then drop that bomb on some property and some humans and explode it, that is all a net loss. That's all a net loss. Unless you're counting the wealth of the fun of the fighter pilot or something like that. But no, this is all money that could have been gone into providing goods and services to people that instead went to go to a machine of destruction. And so just on the very face of it, It's stimulative if you invest in Lockheed and Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and General Atomics and General Dynamics and the rest of those guys. For the rest of us, they're stealing from us to give to them.
I remember them saying that in 02 before that war. And I didn't know what I know now, but I remember the war is good for the economy. Like just think about saying that, how just vile that is to even say. Like, yeah, it's all net loss. It's just, ugh.
Yep.
I can't stand it. Well, we could end. That's actually a good spot to end if you want to end.
Sounds good.
I was going to ask earlier,
Yeah.
I was going to ask you to make the case for someone who's still on the fence about nuclear deterrence. I was going to ask you to
sure.
make the case.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you to make the case against
Yeah.
that.
No, I should do that. And look, I should have done that at the beginning because I know it does sound like a bunch of hippie crap. But here's the thing. Ronald Reagan, not Walter Mondale or, Michael Dukakis, but Ronald Reagan himself came a hair away from a deal to get rid of all nuclear weapons on Earth. With Mikhail Gorbachev in 1986, 2 years before the wall fell, 2 years before the beginning of the end, really, of the Cold War and the fall of the Soviet Union. In 1986, everybody thought that the Soviet Union was going to last into the new millennium. Nobody thought they're coming apart any day now. Just Raimondo did, but nobody else was saying that at that time. And yet Reagan was willing to strike a deal to get rid of all nukes then. And I have it in the book. I have the anecdote from Joe Cirincione, who heard it himself from George Shultz. So the scene is they're in Reykjavik, Iceland. The people in the room is Gorbachev, Reagan, the translator, and Secretary of State Shultz. And Reagan says, hey, oh, and by the way, if you don't know this, when Reagan came in, maybe this started during Carter, the commies started building up mid-range missiles in Europe. And when Reagan came in, he was like, oh, yeah? How do you like this? And he started pouring mid-range missiles in, the Pershing missiles, and started developing the MX missile. Said, you want to do a brinksmanship game with mid-range missiles in Europe? I can raise you 10. Let's do this. And it was really, people were freaked out of the level of brinksmanship there. It almost led to a miscalculation war in 1983 when they held what was called the Able Archer exercise, where it was a practice of a first strike against the Soviet Union. But it was just practice. But the Soviets were convinced that the exercise was just cover for a real first strike, that it was on, and they were going to launch a nuclear first strike on us first because they were sure. That was how certain they were. And then it was only essentially a couple of flukes led to them finally figuring out that this is not going to be a first strike, and ratcheted the tensions down. But we could have all died then in 83 before Jedi even came out. So Reagan had built up all these Pershings in Europe just to trade them away. Here he's meeting with Gorbachev, and he goes, all right, let's get rid of all the short and mid-range missiles. And Gorbachev, he's the new guy, by the way. He's like 41. He just came into power in, I think, 85. And immediately Reagan was like, oh, I like this guy. All the other commies anybody been dealing with were all from the revolution. Guys who'd fought in war, or if not, they'd fought in World War II. And were, all these really old guys. And I think Andropov was the last one of them before Gorbachev comes in. He's only 41. And Reagan's like, all right, I can at least talk to this guy. It makes a little more sense. Anyway, so Reagan says, let's get rid of all the short and medium range missiles. And Gorbachev says, word, let's do it. And then he goes, you know what? Let's get rid of all the long range missiles. In other words, every last nuke. That's it. And Reagan says to Schultz, can we do that? And Schultz says, yes, sir, Mr. President. We sure as hell can. Let's do it. And, he's probably one of the least worst in that administration when it came to issues like that. And so they started talking about it. And then Gorbachev says, now listen, part of the deal will have to be that you give up your Star Wars program of your ballistic missile shield that you want to build. And so they go back and talk to the guys. And there were quite a few of them. And one of my guests names in the book, but I'll add one. The more famous one is Richard Pearl, the self-proclaimed Prince of Darkness, who was right there with Paul Wolfowitz, tied for first place for most important neocon, who lied us into war with Iraq 20 years ago, who's the head of the Defense Policy Board and, ringleader at the American Enterprise Institute, who lied us into war with Iraq. Well, here he and his buddies manipulated Reagan, and they said, listen, Reagan, if you do this deal, which includes abandoning the so-called Star Wars lasers in space missile defense system, which we all know, here we are 30 years ago, that never happened. That never could have happened. That was a total hoax anyway. You talk about anti-missile missiles being a boondoggle. How about lasers in space? Come on, man. This is all just total make-believe. Okay. And 35 years ago, for real. Come on, man. But they convinced Reagan that if you sign this deal that is going to get rid of all nukes and all 3-stage intercontinental ballistic missiles with which to deliver them, but also includes getting rid of the missile shield to protect from those missiles, then that will be betraying the American people and betraying your promise to the American people. And you can't do that, Ronald Reagan. And Reagan said, oh, no, I can't break my promise to the American people, when the whole point is, no, dummy, if we get rid of all of the nukes, then you don't need a damn shield anyway. And this whole thing is a hoax anyway, man. It's just a ripoff anyway. It's never going to work. It's just make-believe anyway. I mean, even the graphics they showed it with were like little Defender graphics, a little triangle shooting a little vector laser at the thing.
Oh, at the Space Invaders?
That's going to work in real life, huh? You know? And so it was based on that, essentially that, complete red herring that they ruined the deal, and Reagan didn't sign it. But he absolutely could have. And then here's how it would work. Okay. Originally, the plan would be that America and the Soviet Union, now Russia, we would reduce our nuclear weapons arsenals down to 200 each. And that would bring us to parity with England, France, Israel, India, and probably Pakistan has right around that number. North Korea has fewer than that, but they probably have a dozen or 2 dozen by now. China has about 200 to 300. At this time, they had, fewer. But we bring our levels down to 200. Then we lean on all of our friends and say, listen, we're all going to disarm together here. And you have the IAEA inspectors enforce it and do all the checking. And we dismantle our nukes. We just outlaw them and dismantle them. Same as we outlawed and dismantled our chemical weapons programs and biological weapons programs, which is not complete, but it could be done better. But, biological warfare programs have been outlawed around the world. We don't have those. Same thing we could do here. They've banned certain kinds of bullets and certain kind of mines and all kinds of different things. You could do the same thing with nukes. And then, America and Russia being the leaders and operating in good faith here, lean on our friends, the Brits, the French, the Israelis, the Indians, the Pakistanis, that we're all going to disarm of our atom bombs now. And then let's get down to 100. Let's get down to 50. Let's see if we can get it down to 10. Do I hear 10? 10 going once, 10 going twice. Let's get, let's hold it at 10. Let's get to where everybody has 10. And then let's sit on that for 10 years. And then let's see after 10 years whether we can maybe go down to 5. And maybe we could go, right? So in other words, this doesn't have to be Bewitched, wiggles her nose, or Superman 4 comes and throws them all into the sun. And then just there's no problems anymore. There's no reason to think of it in that light. The reality is, think of it just like reality. Think of it as a bunch of damned foreign ministers out there doing their best to negotiate these things away. If that was the climate, if that was what we were really trying to do. And again, led by a firm, real handshake by the likes of Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev, could have led the world into total disarmament. It would take not Joe Biden and probably not Vladimir Putin now. It would probably take a new generation of leaders to be able to move forward with that. But, this is what, not that anybody listens to me, but this is what I counseled to, what Trump should have done. Remember, by the time he took power, the Russiagate stuff was already on full tilt. They'd been pushing it since the beginning of the summer. They were calling this guy a traitor. And 3 days before he was inaugurated, the CIA and the FBI just put up this completely ridiculous intelligence assessment with no facts in it whatsoever, but essentially claiming that Putin rigged the election for Trump, that he wouldn't have won otherwise, and all of this. And then what I said was what Putin should do is he should, fire everybody at the top of the CIA and the FBI and the Justice Department, everybody is outright, the top 50 people, whatever, all of them gone. And then he should invite Putin to Washington, D.C. should take him out to the opera, feed him a nice steak dinner, and then sign a new nuclear weapons reduction treaty. And let's bring our arsenals way, way down, and then just take that whole Russiagate narrative and just shove it right down the Democrats' throat and tell them, all right, you sons of bitches, you go and you tell your Democratic constituents why you oppose this new nuclear weapons reduction treaty. And, frame it like that, which they would not have been able to do. And in fact, even during the height of the Russiagate scare, there were a couple of times where Dianne Feinstein and Chuck Schumer, who are sort of like the elders of the Democratic Party in the Senate, were like, geez, we are going to save the New START treaty, right? And we don't want to, and this is at the height of the hoax that Trump is the secret Manchurian candidate working for the Russians and everything. And they're like, yeah, but you're not going to tear up the INF treaty, are you? Yeah, exactly. Because when you're not lying and you're actually just dealing in the real world, there's nothing more important in the world than these nuclear treaties between America and Russia. Nothing. They're in first place and everything else is in 100 millionth place after that. And so, late in the afternoon, even Chuck Schumer will be like, geez, I think maybe we need to save these treaties, right, guys? Yeah, you're damn right. And so that's how Trump should have played that, is he should have just absolutely, and I left out a step. When he fired everyone at the Justice Department, all the top leaders of the FBI and the Justice Department over the Russiagate hoax, he should have not dressed it up as any other thing. He should have said, because of the Russiagate hoax, which is a hoax, and I'm telling you it's a hoax, I know it's a hoax because I know that it's not true. And I never did anything, but here's how we're going to handle this, though. Instead of it just being an impeachable Saturday night massacre, what we're going to do is, as I fire all of these people, I also hereby declassify every scrap of paper from my campaign and every scrap of paper that the FBI or Justice Department, National Security Agency, or CIA have on my relationship with Russia or anyone in my campaign or anyone in my orbit in any of their relationship with Russia or any Russian asset or agent as broadly defined as possible. And I hereby order all of those materials turned over to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal and National Public Radio. And you sons of bitches, you do your worst. You go for it. And then meanwhile, we're going to be over here signing a nuclear weapons reduction treaty with our partner, Vladimir Putin, my dinner guest tonight. Right. And then it's the world's biggest. You guys can suck it if you don't like it, from a position of strength, an absolute position of strength. And because he really did have nothing to fear. And that idea is not that original, right? That he would have turned over all that stuff to the newspapers like that, because here's what really happened in real life was his lawyer, Dowd, told him, listen, Mr. President, we have to have this conversation, a frank conversation. You and me, no one else in the room. You have to tell me the God's honest truth. Is there anything here? Anything at all? And Trump goes, no, goddammit. It's all a lie. And Dowd says, okay, then you don't mind if I turn over every scrap of paper from your campaign to the special counsel investigation. And Trump goes, go ahead. Please, I beg you. Take every scrap of paper. You need my text messages here. Take everything and give it to the prosecutor. And then Dowd goes to the prosecutor, goes, look, here's everything we have. So we expect, all we're asking in return is a little respect and that you guys treat us honestly. Ha! Yeah, right. And this is on Bob Woodward's book. It's the source for all this. All right. So that was Trump's take. Trump's take was, I don't have a damn thing to hide and screw you. Here, take it. Right? So he could have done that exact same thing, only with not just his campaign's papers, but he could have said, and I hereby decree as overlord of the planet Earth that the Justice Department, the FBI, the CIA, and NSA, that everything is declassified and they now have to turn over everything they have on me too. And turn it over to my enemies at the Post and the Times. And let's see what's the worst you can do to me. But it'll be all open and public and not another 2-year pretended special counsel investigation, But he's such an idiot. He couldn't do a damn thing right, including, fight his own case. I mean, there were times, sorry, I'm on this tangent, but there were times during Russiagate when, Aaron Mate would have this article for The Nation That's like 7,000 words about how Donald Trump didn't do it. And here's a progressive writing for the Liberal Nation magazine. And he's just saying, this isn't true. This is the CIA and the FBI are putting on this hoax. And then Donald Trump would tweet out, witch hunt, unfair. Right? But he didn't even have the wherewithal to even know, or to even know anybody who knew that the Democrats' favorite magazine ran a piece today about how you're innocent. He didn't even know, right? Like he couldn't even find someone on his staff who even followed enough people on Twitter to even have noticed that. You know what I mean? He's so stupid. He's surrounded by nothing but people who are also as stupid as him. He can't even say, look, even the Nation magazine says I didn't do it. Case closed. Well, that was a year before they closed the case, right? And this guy, God's sake, can you imagine? Here we needed Ron Paul and we got Donald Trump, everybody, you know?
Clown world.
But there you go. So that's how we could do it. We really could do it. Ronald Reagan believed that we really could do it. But America would need to drop all this pretension of being the world empire, and everybody else has to do what we say forevermore, and recognize that, no, we have to recognize the sovereignty of other nations. If we demand they recognize our independence from them. It's a two-way street there, and just treat each other with mutual respect. As simple as that.
Yeah, so
I love it.
That simple.
I absolutely love it.
It's all in the book too.
In the new book, you want here, drop all your plugs if you want, Scott.
Yeah, where can people find the new book and as well as your previous works?
Okay, well, my show and the book and everything is at scotthorton.org. I got 5,700 interviews going back to 2003 for you there at scotthorton.org, and at youtube.com/scotthortonshow, and also at odyssey.com/scotthortonshow as well. Got the full archive going there. And then I'm the editorial director of antiwar.com, which is the most important project on the internet. And that's, Kyle Anzalone, keeping track of the opinion pieces for you there. And the great Dave DeCamp is our news editor there, holding down all the anti-war news for you all day, every day at antiwar.com. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute. It's a great bunch of guys. Most of us are all foreign policy guys too, but we got a couple with a broader take than that. Great group of writers there at the Libertarian Institute. And not only did I just publish this new book, Hotter Than the Sun, but we also just put out the Voluntarist Handbook, edited by Keith Knight, which is this great collection
Keith.
of anarcho-capitalist writings for you there. And that's all at libertarianinstitute.org/books. And then I'm on the radio in LA on Sunday mornings at 9 on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA. And I'm on Twitter at Scott Horton Show. I think that's it.
Sweet. Yeah, and I'll put a link. I'll put a link to the Amazon and stuff in the.
Okay, cool. Oh, and I could say
YouTube.
I wrote Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, and Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. And I also edited The Great Ron Paul, the Scott Horton Show interviews 2004 through 19, is another collection of transcripts of interviews. But hey, it's Ron Paul, so you got to love that. And then, the latest is Hotter Than the Sun, Time to Abolish Nuclear Weapons.
Boom. All right. Hex. Yeah, and thank you so much for coming on, Scott. This was really cool. I'm glad. I was like, we're just going to learn stuff today. I love it.
Yep.
Well, you're so great to listen to. Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, it's great hanging out with you guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Hex, you want to drop your stuff real quick?
Everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, SoundCloud, Hexcelerate.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Thanks again, Hex and Scott. Bye.